Our next speaker was supposed to be Vít Goncharuk from Augmented Pixels, but unfortunately he wasn't able to make it today. And instead of that, we decided to hold a panel discussion with the people who already have been on this stage today and discuss the same topic that Vít was going to talk about, the way for Eastern European startups, the way for startups in general to penetrate the US market and to succeed there. And I would like to invite on this stage our today's panelists, Val Gerdes, Can Saraçoğlu, and Nikolai Savin. Please go ahead on the stage. Thanks for joining me. And yeah, please take a seat. And John might not be here, but he will join us a bit later, I guess. Cheers. Anyways, let's start with one thing. Is there actually any sort of mentality that you need to break before entering the US market? That's, first of all, should be true for the CE startups. Nikolai, starting with you.
I would say maybe break is too harsh, but there's definitely a lot of things you need to kind of adapt and accept. So like a trust level is much higher, but at the same time, the way how people do business, everything's a bit faster, and relationship do matter, I would say even more. So we quite often have this stereotype that like US is all about money. So, but it is, but it's money after relationship, so you have to be able to build them.
Is it much different here?
I would say yes. So even we see like on operational level, quite often companies prefer to chase like a short-term gains in like money-wise, and to sacrifice relationship on the long term. At the same time, like in US, what we see is that much often relationships and trust matters more. So it's sometimes even easier to have some kind of deal, some small things like discounts, prolongation or renegotiation. If it's needed, if you're talking to people, it's really easy to do business together.
Well, what's your take on the mentality break?
Yeah, I agree with Nikolai. I think, oddly enough, perhaps, obviously, we're 99% much more the same than we are different. And one thing that we notice when we work with funds or startups or folks coming from abroad, especially from here, is that obviously Californians smile more, right? And so the initial impression, what lahi, right? Oh, we're gonna everybody's super friendly. It's almost artificially so. And I think what happens is that the Varonka, the initial period, is just the thing that's different. But in about 15 minutes, or maybe in the next meeting, if you get one, that's when they're actually pretty badass. They're just as tough in negotiation, just as tough in getting deals as we are, right? And that initial impression, right, is an interesting one to catch. I mean, obviously, there's the mythologized idea that it's a pay-it-forward culture, right? As Nikolai said, I guess Steve Jobs was even legendary in that he would say, okay, to his secretary or whatever, here's half a day, and I'm going to take calls from startups. And apparently, he would actually lift up the phone. You could actually call Steve Jobs, lift up the phone, and you could get a few minutes from him. And it's something that we always advise startups to do, right? You have that initial 15 minutes at a cocktail party or on LinkedIn. And it's a very specific type of email, or it's a very specific type of combination that you ask. It's called the ask, right? So you say, here's a quick pitch, here's what I do, and would you have 15 minutes just for coffee where we could meet? And it's surprising the amount of people that usually, if it's an interesting enough pitch, and especially if you come referred by somebody, right? That's the key, that they will say yes. And so you show up exactly on time, if not a little bit early. You take exactly those 15, 20 minutes. Nice. There you are. and you have a very specific agenda, right? You obviously listen to them and you give them that ask. So it's possible. It's actually quite nice to network there in a way. But after that 15 minutes, right, if you don't sell them, it's virtually impossible to get a second meeting. So there's two scenarios, usually three, right? You just don't get the second meeting. They politely say thank you, right? They're always very polite, especially venture capitalists. They always drive you nuts, right? Because they very rarely say no. Like, you're an idiot, forget it, right? That's the stupidest idea. They'll never tell you that, right? And one of the reasons is that you might actually turn out to be the next big thing. And then they'll be on record having said no, and then they're the idiots, right? Bessemer is one of the few. They actually keep the deals that we lost. They actually keep a public list of that. Like, here are all the deals that we could have gone into that did pitch to us that we said no to. But they're Bessemer, right? They're like so damn cool that they can get away with that. But otherwise, venture capitalists, you usually want a very clear yes or no. You want to bring people in that conversation to a why no decision point, because then it just saves you time, right? But because the longer they say maybe, the longer they drag you on, the more. And a lot of venture capitalists like to play go fetch, right? Like, you throw a ball to a dog, it brings it back. You throw a ball to the dog, it brings it back. And they do that just to inform themselves, right? It's a really nasty process. Right? So when you see that happening, you're like, okay, thanks. I'll go talk to somebody else. But if you can get through that, so that's one outcome is to get a no, hopefully. That's actually a good outcome. This other two outcomes, I think, are to get, obviously, a yes, and I like it, and here are the next steps. But the middle outcome is actually a good one, I think, if you don't mind, less 30 seconds. It's a maybe, and here's some people you need to talk to. And I think that's a really cool thing. It happens here too, but there, because of that pay-it-forward culture, they give you that first 15 minutes, and it's a nice thing to use, right? Because one person leads you to 3 people, right? Those 3 people lead you to 15 people, right? And it just kind of expands geometrically. And if you can do that well, it's a nice network technique. It takes time. It takes a very specific structure. You can't just say, hey, what do you think? You have to have very specific asks, right? Very specific questions, but just as idea. But then after the second meeting, it gets tough, just as it does here. But I think you do have that benefit of the doubt initially, right? Maybe more so than you do in these hierarchical cultures where nobody will meet you high up, especially unless you're like referred by whatever, their president or something crazy like that.
Right. Jan, and since you might have not heard the question, do you think there is any sort of a mentality to break for startups from our region when entering the US market?
Well, we suggest startups from our region to pick good accelerator programs. I mean, we invest in Silicon Valley and we invest in the region. Our portfolio is 50-50. For the US startups, we don't suggest them to go into Y Combinator or Techstars or anything. But if you're a startup from the region, it's like a foothold. It makes life much more easier for them to get in touch with the sort of great mentors, investors, and all that stuff. So the most basic advice is to sort of prepare for Y Combinator, AngelPad, Techstars, and try to get into them. And then life becomes much more easier, I would say. So it's like a smart entry point into an ecosystem which is much harder to penetrate for foreigners. And when you actually look at the Y Combinator applicants, we always check which startups that they took in the sort of last batch. And the quality actually is different. Like the US startups are not that cool anymore because really cool US startups don't need to get into Y Combinator, really. I mean, for instance, there was this dollar shaving club, and a competitor said a dollar cologne aftershave club, and they got into Y Combinator. But if that idea was from our region, they will never get accepted. So the quality is also sort of differential in terms of acceptance from abroad. But that's the most frictionless, most easiest way to get a foothold, I would say.
Right. I recently had a conversation with someone I know, Yaroslav Azhnuk from PetCube. Nikolai must know him, at least. And we were talking about Silicon Valley tourism. You must, all three of you should know what that is. And he was saying, in particular, that it makes zero sense for startups to come to Silicon Valley for like less than a couple of years, at least, to learn how to do business there. Do you agree or disagree with this sort of statement? Nikolai, starting from you.
Well, it really depends on what your goals are. Because if you would like to fundraise in the US, besides acceleration incubation programs, I would say definitely yes. Because to fundraise on a seed stage or from angels, you have to be local. You have to integrate. Maybe someone could do this like in a half a year, but for someone else it could take like 5 years to become local. If there's at least some traction and something to show, especially traction in US. So there might be some chance for a bit more mature funds, but in general, yeah, it will take like years. But at the same time, if you are looking for this like a trip, not as a tourist trip, not a fundraising trip, but a business development trip, when you're going there to talk to your clients, most of the times startups fail, right? Not because they failed to create product, but because they fail to find a market for it. And I've seen quite a lot of times that even a couple of weeks with like decent agenda and meetings with the right people, basically with your clients, could do a lot of good for a startup to clarify their strategy, to help them with next steps, but definitely not for fundraising.
Understood. Val, how about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely agree. A lot of our business, we try to avoid startups because it's so hard. It's such hard work, especially early stage, right? Because they're very resource constricted, right? And we're very, very expensive. But that's okay. I mean, there's other ways to skin the cat, and not skin the cat. There's other ways to enjoy and the challenges together. But and absolutely agree. We're very, very, very much for doing business development, as Nikolai said, or customer development, or product development very early, and I talked about that in the speech. In fact, as early as you can. If you're thinking about global, there's a lot of great companies that can simply be local, but if you're thinking about global, we've seen so many instances where you do end up with tourism, right? And so many accelerators where you do end up with tourism at the end in Silicon Valley. And it's fun, right? And you get the energy, and there's actually good things in the tourism because it's something sometimes gets into your brain. And then afterwards you think, I remember that, let's try that, or let's try these people, these contacts that we made. But for business development, it's very, very important. If you're thinking global, it's a nice touch point. I mean, Ireland, obviously, there's other places in the world that are good touch points for technology, but Silicon Valley, not because, I guess, it's like Y Combinator's back, the brand attracts, it's just the power of the brand attracts the best startups, and because it attracts the best startups, it becomes a more powerful brand. So it's almost like a vacuum cleaner. It's just an interesting place to be because globally, a lot of people have presences there, right? All of the car companies have their R&D offices, or at least part of their R&D is there. All of the big corporates are paying a ton of money, and this isn't known by a lot, but for the incubators and even the co-working spaces that are in Silicon Valley, they're paying a ton of money to get access to that deal flow, right? They're simply looking and saying, okay, who's sitting here, right? What's going on in my market? It's research, market knowledge for them, right? So it's just an interesting place to be for that. So, but the challenge is it's a noisy place. There's all kinds of stuff going on, but you do need to do for biz dev. And our thesis is that if you're going there purely for investment, you're not going to do it. It's very, very difficult. There's very few examples of foreign companies that show up and raise a ton of money. You really need, it's like anybody foreigner showing here and raising a ton of money if you don't have a traction here, if you don't have local presence here. So it's really a two-step process. I think and we're very much about in parallel, at least starting to flirt with the venture guys, right? Say, oh, I'm about to go into YC, or I'm here for an interview with 500 startups, or I'm talking to these, big clients or potential partners. I don't need your money, but I just wanted to get to know you, right? I wanted to, I'll keep you posted if you don't mind. And if it's interesting to the venture guys, you almost start to do that in parallel. It's almost like a pre-invest or a pre-sale with those guys. And it's an interesting process, I think. So it's nice to launch that in parallel. And obviously, it's a great stack of wealth, too. But, I mean, sometimes we see great angel groups coming together here to support folks. And then, and just the last note about PetCube, I mean, great success story. What a wonderful, and hopefully there's many more of those to come, and there already are. Wakey got into that same class from Russia. There's another chatbot that just got into YC. We have 2 of our startups that are just getting in, and Ken, you probably have a few that are just getting into interviews right now. And they're like saying, holy shit, there's like, who are all these people from Eastern Europe? I mean, they're used to, the Chinese and the Indians going, just crushing them, but now we're doing it, which is fantastic. So one secret way is to catch Nikolai or catch Ken or catch me and say, hey, we could courier it, right? Because these guys all have really great networks there. And that's another way, besides going straight into the accelerator, say, hey, can you courier me? Can you check my business plan? Can you introduce me to a couple key folks? And that way you can try that. But for them, it was just doubly hard because A, they're going B2C, which is nuts, right? It's very difficult, even for native Silicon Valley or US folks to do B2C, especially for foreign guys, because languaging, product placement. B, double hit, they're doing hardware, more or less. So they have a huge distribution system. And we help them out a little bit as much as we can. And within YC, we gave them a recommendation. But it's very hard. You have to put these boxes physically into stores. And you can't just show up at Fry's Electronics or something, right, and say, here, take my box. There's a whole chain of distribution. It's a very old school distribution market as it is here probably. There's brokers, there's distributors, there's logistics guys, and by the time you go down this food chain, your margin is like nothing.
Yeah, that's not changing at all.
No, it's very, that market really, if anybody can think of a way to disrupt that market, let us know. We'll invest you in. A lot of people have tried it. Those guys still send faxes back and forth. We're doing a couple other FMGCs. We're thinking, man, this is tough. So, I mean, they were up against, I think it took a few years for them, and it'll take a few more, actually, because they needed to do, they're A, doing B2C, B, they're doing hardware, so they have to break into this whole distribution chain there locally, which is really a mafia. I mean, those guys are badass. I mean, they each take 30%, right? And then you're left with, what, like 2. And then 3, for B2C sales, they ultimately needed to hire locals, right? So big burn rate. You need to hire local guys, and those guys aren't cheap in Silicon Valley. It's very, very much not cheap. Much, much easier to B2B, do all the development out here, just come in and do the quick shots for biz dev, and not have to have these Silicon Valley, especially sales guys, pay salary. You put them on commission as much as you can, but they have pretty high bases, I bet you, right? So, I mean, they were up against a kind of a triple threat.
So, John, do you advise your startups to go live in Silicon Valley for a while?
Well, we advise them to move to Silicon Valley.
Right.
Just to give you a good example, we're running the accelerator program of the top engineering school of Turkey, and 5 years ago, one of them got the winner of the accelerator program. It was an e-learning platform. They set up the company in Turkey, and for the next 3 years, they struggled. And one of the co-founders said, hey, I had enough. I have nothing, no money left, but I'm just going to Silicon Valley and we'll try the same product from there. And then it turned out into a $600 million company. So now in Turkey, they got aware that, there is not much point to hold on to those companies, but we suggest the kind of Israeli model, like product in the valley and R&D and engineering might be in your own home country, because Silicon Valley prices are, soaring up so much, so it's becoming very costly. But this is what we suggest, basically. I mean, if you want to be a global player, that's the only sort of gateway to play that game. And what's important as well, like in Turkey and in Ukraine, some of our mindset is not really geared for that, but for really dense programs like Y Combinator, it cuts you off from your previous life, and it really changes your mindset, really changes your sort of way of thinking. And so, yeah, we definitely suggest them to move and become a Valley company.
Okay, so we're out of time, guys. Thank you very much for answering the question.